Awesome. Very good.
Welcome aboard. Moving on to item 5, public comment. At this time, those in the audience are encouraged to address the board on any items of interest that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and not already included on tonight's agenda. Comments should not exceed 5 minutes. Are there any speaker cards for members of the public?
No, there aren't.
Thank you. Moving on to item 6, agenda management.
No recommended changes.
Perfect. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, consent calendar. Matters listed under this item are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion in the form listed below. There'll be no separate discussion of these items unless requested by a member of the board or the public prior to the item or prior to the time the board votes on the motion to adopt. Is there a motion to approve the items underneath the consent?
I'll move. Oh, good.
I'll second.
Okay, got a motion by Director Govinda Rao and a second by Director Georgine von Heater-Leopold. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any noes? Any abstentions? Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Figured I had to
At
close
least
off
you,
the
well,
year.
you got the right first name. That's good.
Moving on to item 8, board business. Item 8A, receive an update on the on-site solar battery storage EV charging CIP 24A046 and off-site solar CIP 24-L045 projects. Staff.
Good evening, President Goel, members of the board. I'm Steve Delight, the Engineering Service Director. Tonight we have Russell Driver with ARC Alternatives. He's here to deliver a presentation on the current status of the solar project. The projects were recommended as part of the Energy Master Plan or included in the current CIP. We hired ARC Alternatives to help us through the process of issuing requests for proposals for a power purchase agreement, and they are assisting us with the review and negotiation of the agreements. Russell will fill you in on the process so far, where we're at right now, and next steps. And with that, Russell, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Russell Driver with ARC Alternatives. I'm a principal who leads our renewables practice. See if I can get this. There we go. Tonight I'm going to cover the procurement process we went through, including the request for proposals the district issued, our evaluation and recommendation of who the district should consider contracting with for the work. I'll walk through the financial analysis that we completed and then talk a little bit about the structure of a power purchase agreement, which is what's being contemplated with the solar vendor, and then talk a little bit about process and next steps. We released a request for proposals or RFP in June of this year. It received 6 responses in July from the firms listed on the slide. We had a comprehensive evaluation process spelled out in the RFP that looked at 4 broad categories that were part of our evaluation: qualifications and experience, their technical approach, project economics, which really comes down to an evaluation of the life cycle costs and savings associated with doing the project, and then lastly, the financial strength of the respondents. After an initial evaluation, we interviewed 2 of the respondents, and the interview was conducted by members of the ARC team as well as staff from the district and from LAVMA. We interviewed Endelos Energy and Enerlogics, and we have started contract negotiations with Endelos as a result of that process. One thing I wanted to point out is that the contracting approach being contemplated is under a California government code called 4217, and that code permits public agencies in California to award energy contracts outside of a competitive process. The statute, however, has some requirements that need to be complied with in order to execute an agreement under 4217. And that's mostly process-related requirements, the need to hold a public hearing at a regularly scheduled board meeting, and to provide 2 weeks' notice of such a hearing. And in the hearing or at the meeting, the board needs to make a finding that the proposed agreement and project results in financial savings over the expected useful life of the energy systems being installed under that contract. What we did is develop a competitive procurement process that sits under Government Code 4217. And the reason for that is that it allows us to make best value selection outside of typical public works contracting, which is important for energy systems because the long-term performance of those systems has much to do with the economic performance or savings that you'll achieve. Additionally, almost all solar contracts in California are design build or power purchase agreements, which work much the same way as a design build contract, and those aren't always a great fit for low bid kind of contract situations. So we've found over the years that fitting a best value competitive process underneath 4217 provides a lot of benefits and flexibility to our clients. I'm now going to walk through what the proposed systems would look like. And we're looking at systems on all 4 sites that are owned by the DSRSD, the Services District, which includes LAVMA. And so starting with the district office, it's about a 132, 133 kilowatt system that would be installed primarily on the roofs and perhaps a small carport as well. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we're contemplating 2 EV chargers at this site. And again, they'd be in a non-public part of the site, most likely around back, to support future EV fleet vehicles should the district end up purchasing any in the future. The layout you're looking at here is still like all the layouts under development and refinement as part of the contract negotiations, and I'll come back around to that point in a few minutes. At the field operations facility, it's the same story where we're looking at a carport structure as well as some capacity on the roof. And this looks, we're looking at about 177 kilowatts of solar capacity at this site. The treatment plant is, I imagine, like a lot of things you contemplate there, a bit more complicated. We're looking at more capacity there, just a touch under 600 kilowatts. The capacity of solar generation would be installed on a combination of rooftops and carports again, and it's kind of spread all over the site, just based on the physical characteristics and constraints of the site. We would also be contemplating a battery installation here as well. And then last is the LAVMA site. These would all be ground-mounted systems, not carports, not on the roof, and would also involve a battery installation as well. In both cases, at the treatment plant and at LAVMA, we'd be talking about somewhere around a 1 megawatt battery with a 2-hour discharge life cycle. So the way they talk about that is 1 megawatt, 2,000 kilowatt hour battery is how that's framed up. And so let me talk about the savings. And again, these numbers are based on the proposal received from Endelos and Arc Alternatives, my company, if I could say it. Did the financial modeling based on their bid prices and system sizes and the like. What this graph shows is the net savings for the district by year, and the orange line is the cumulative savings over time. And so what you see here is overall, for all 4 sites, a net positive savings starting in year 1 and continuing for the life of the project, with a total net savings of about $8.6 million. In our modeling, we assume a very conservative utility escalation rate of a touch under 4% at 3.85%, which I'm sure you're all aware is significantly lower than what the actual escalation or inflation rate of electricity has been for the last 8 years or more. We do this to make sure that if the inflation rate on electricity drops, that you don't see negative cash flow in your years. And if we're being overly conservative, then you would see the savings be larger than what we're showing here. The model also includes an annual degradation rate on the solar panels. Most models do, and that's just because the solar panels do see reduced performance over time. And since we're modeling this for a full 20 years, we want to make sure we're capturing that as we do the numbers. The numbers do also include some savings due to the battery component of the system being installed as well. So that's an all-in number.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick question on that? So
Certainly,
going back to the 4 sites, does that include the Lavma site as well?
it does.
So if you were to take out the Lavma site, what would the savings be? Have we factored that into account as well?
Yeah, it would. I don't have those numbers summed up that way. If you like, at the end of the presentation, I have slides for each of the sites individually and
Okay.
how they perform as a cash flow, and we can kind of just look at it and add it up in our heads.
If I could add, just because I feel like I've been seeing these numbers over and over, it's about 1.6 million for Lavma.
Okay.
So you would subtract that off.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Perfect.
You have been looking at it pretty closely, huh?
Okay. This is an annual cash flow. I don't intend to go through this. I like to show this version of the numbers because it's a bit easier to see year by year what's going on. And as you look at it, if you had a chance to review the materials ahead of time, for example, if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to get into the technical nature of this. I often have to refer to this slide if I'm asked specific questions about how the economics are working. I also thought it was important to emphasize that under the power purchase agreement that's being contemplated, it would include a performance guarantee, and that's structured in a way that if the systems perform below what is laid out in the contract, then the contractor in Delos would have to compensate the district for that lack of production. The specifics of the language is a little bit involved because there are some exception events and weather adjustments and other things that go into it. But the basic concept is they're guaranteeing 95% of the expected performance of the system. And if there's a shortfall, they'll compensate you on your damages, quote unquote, which would be the difference between this PPA rate and what you end up having to pay the utility for the power that you're buying from them that you didn't expect to. So that's an extra layer of protection within the power purchase agreement. I also wanted to mention that the power purchase agreement itself is structured in a way that aligns the contractor's interest with the district's that a purchase of the system would not. And that's because the contractor does not get compensated unless that system is producing energy. So they own the asset, they finance its installation, and they sell you the power, and you only purchase the power that is produced by the system, and that purchase rate is fixed in the contract and has no escalation associated with it. And that's different for each of the sites that we're talking about. Some things to think about in terms of the contract: the pricing we received from Endelos, which is the same as all the vendors who responded to the RFP, assumes that the project qualifies for the federal investment tax credit. To access the credit, they need to take some action in terms of purchasing by the end of 2025. And that's because in the budget reconciliation bill from last July, a lot of the rules were changed around federal investment tax credit eligibility, and they're phasing it out. And so that's a big impetus for the project moving quickly and is driving a lot of the schedule. So we're sort of trying to position the project to take advantage of that credit, because if it doesn't, the energy rates you see through the PPA would be much higher than we're looking at now. So in order to do that, Endelos is looking to, as I said, process some purchase orders on their side and to line up some equipment. There's a safe harbor provision in the tax code that's been there forever that allows them to do that. And so what they're looking for at this point is a letter of intent between the services district and Endelos, more accurately, their financing partner, REP is what they're called. by the end of the year so that they can process those purchase orders. The letter of intent, we've already had a back and forth with them on it with the help from the legal team at both LAVMA and DSRSD, and have high level agreement on what the terms of that letter of intent would look like. What it essentially does is it says that we are going to negotiate with them exclusively for a period of 90 days and in good faith. And it spells out the overall commercial terms being contemplated. And those are things like the PPA prices and the system sizes and ownership of renewable energy credits and a couple of other key provisions. And in return for executing that letter of intent, they are going to procure the equipment for the project, secure the investment tax credit in anticipation of negotiating and executing a full power purchase agreement early next year, likely January. So that's how we're trying to keep on schedule and keep the project economics in good shape by leveraging the investment tax credit. And they've suggested this middle ground, something short of a full execution of a full agreement, in order to keep that moving. So next steps, and in summary, the project's going to deliver about $8.6 million in savings. The other thing that it bears mentioning is that we are working with the Andelos team and staff to do a little extra technical work to see if we can improve that number and improve on the design. So, for example, one thing being contemplated is to remove the very small carport shade structure in the back of this building and get all of the capacity up on the roof, which would lower the PPA rate and increase the savings. But we're not there yet. And so the parties have committed to a principle that if we don't better these numbers, we stick with exactly what they proposed initially. So that's kind of the technical work going on right now. And so in the next very short term, by the end of this week, it's our intent to have the language finalized for the letter of intent so that it come back to the board in December for approval, as well as the LAVMA board for their consideration. And then to keep moving in parallel on negotiating all of the terms in the full PPA to come back in January with that. There's also CEQA work going on right now, which I think the first results of which are about a week out, maybe a little bit less, having to do with how CEQA is going to be treated for this project. And I think much of it is going to be exempt, but there may be a few issues related to CEQA that we're going to deal with as part of the same approval process with the project. And I believe that's it for me. Yes. So I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on my right? None?
Could you go back 2 slides, please? These types of agreements are usually beneficial to the owners as opposed to the contractors. So as I see it, the main risk to us is if the output is less than the guaranteed amount, we might have a disagreement about the compensation rate that's going to be negotiated at that point in time.
That's language we're currently working on, and what we try to have in the agreement is a number for what that looks like. And I hesitate because it's a little bit complicated, because it's really the difference between your all-in cost of electricity with your utility and the PPA price. And the all-in cost of electricity with the utility changes over time. And so that's what we're working on. And so the question is whether you're going to calculate it at the time that that's going on, or you agree maybe on a number now and an escalation rate on it. So that's exactly the issue.
And if the degradation rate is only 0.5% on the panels per year, that becomes cumulative?
Yes, and that's incorporated in the formula. So there's literally a table in the agreement that you'll see that says, like in year 11, for example, what the expected production is, and that number will be degraded from the year 1 number, as you would expect. That's right.
My question.
Any questions on the left?
The only question I had is, so will this need to be approved by the LAVMA board before the end of the year? And if the answer is yes, then I mean, I guess they'll probably have to have a special meeting.
They've continued their item to a date certain. And that
12/9.
date, the date certain is December 9th.
Okay.
Correct. As President Goel said, the LAVMA board met on November 18th
Right.
and continued their meeting to December 9th. The current approach is for DSRSD as the site owner to enter into both the LOI and the PPA on behalf of LAVMA.
Okay.
And so one of the actions that the LAVMA board will consider taking on December 9th would be to authorize DSRSD to enter into these agreements on their behalf.
Okay. Great. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
I have a couple. So on the LAVMA piece, it's all ground mount. Are those fixed tilt or are they trackers?
It would be fixed tilt.
Is that the best choice?
I'll try to provide some context for that. Years ago, maybe 10 to 20 years ago, we saw much more tracking solar, and that's because the cost of the individual panels was high and their efficiency was lower. And so the whole economic equation you were solving for was how to make best use of every ounce of silicon that you were putting into the system. That is no longer the case. Now it's labor and balance of system is most of the cost. And so by putting more capacity out, more modules, you get better economic outcomes by and large than less modules that are tracking. Because the other, and I apologize if I'm getting a little deep, the other issue with trackers is you have to space the rows out further, because when they track the sun, they cast longer shadows at the beginning and the end of the day. And so you can build denser solar systems without tracking, if that makes sense. So you have more capacity, but the output per unit of capacity is a little bit lower with a fixed system. And that's where the design has been for the last 5-8 years.
I believe you. That's not the experience I had. I've seen only trackers go in on utility scale projects. No, this is not utility scale, so maybe it's a different gig.
Yeah, I think that equation can shift if you get up into the high megawatt, like north of 10 megawatt kind of range.
Which is where I lived.
Okay.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah, that's possible.
Thanks for the context. And then the LOI, assuming this comes together in the next 10 days and we sign the LOI, they're going to, I thought the safe harbor was 5% of total project cost.
It is.
So they shouldn't have to procure both panels and batteries. That's going to get them close to 50% of project cost.
The battery question is about this foreign entities of concern provision, and these solar vendors are still trying to figure that out. And so the one compliance path that folks are feeling more optimistic about is that if the battery and the solar is considered one project, then you can fold the battery in under the 5% safe harbor and cover the whole thing with modules and not worry about the batteries right there. But if the foreign entity of concern provision kicks in at the end of the year, they need to get their hands on the battery because there aren't enough suppliers outside of countries like China that are on that list. I think we're in the former, but that's the vendor has to manage that business risk to their comfort level,
And then
tax attorneys.
the last one, I promise. So the follow-up then would be LOI gets signed. We get into January. I've seen plenty of solar projects. Let's just say this one doesn't come together, which I've seen a gazillion times. What in the LOI protects us so we don't own a bunch of batteries and panels?
That is the heart of the question that staff and your attorneys have been working on very hard for the last week or so. And the draft agreement we're going to be providing them carves that out in an explicit way where the district has no obligation to cover the vendor's costs if the PPA is not executed.
Okay. And that's just in the spirit of disclosure. That's getting to me. So if we don't have that clause, I'm not going to support.
Correct. And I was going to ask whether Doug wanted to add on.
No, I think that was I think that addressed the question. There's, as letters of intent go, there is not a lot of meat to this particular one. A lot of uh, the risk shifting at this point is going over to the vendor. If in a scenario where they're not able to procure either the panels or the batteries in order to make their deadlines to qualify for the investment tax credit, um, there will be a different decision for this board to consider potentially in January, because the deal will change, because they will not be able to provide um, the panels and the energy savings that were in the proposal. In the draft of the power purchase agreement itself, failure to reach that milestone is actually a reason for the agreement to fail. So it's a condition precedent before that agreement becomes effective and binding. So that that actually is an interesting one, because the letter of intent is trying to give us just a little bridge to that point.
Right. And
So
my concern is the opposite problem. I mean, let's assume that they have good vendors and they're going to get the equipment.
okay,
If they don't get the equipment, then the whole deal's off because we're not going to qualify for any credits and the finances will blow up. So they get the equipment. We get to January. Some commercial clauses just create a situation where we can't come to an agreement. Do they have title to that gear, or are we going to end up owning a bunch of batteries and panels?
without the power purchase agreement, it's all on them. All that risk still remains with them. The I will say the district's not the sole obligation under the letter of intent, but the most significant is simply just to negotiate in good faith based on the commercial terms that are provided. There may be other terms in the PPA that we would not be able to reach agreement on, and if that's the case, as long as we negotiated in good faith, that we can walk away, they can walk away.
And they own a bunch of panels and batteries, which they probably already do. I mean,
It's
those two components are the mutable ones. You can move those
Correct.
anywhere.
If we don't reach agreement on the PPA, each party walks away having sunk their own cost into the negotiations.
Yeah, it's a little hard to speculate, and I won't ask Russell to do so. But from the various emails and such that I've seen, there's a they may have the ability to reallocate that equipment elsewhere. There's just simply there's other creative ways of procuring and getting to that 5% number that may not actually have them taking title to that equipment. Because if you read, which you probably have, you read the details of those federal regulations that create that 5% level. There is some creativity that can be applied there through subsidiaries, affiliates, and other, even using other, I don't want to refer to them as shell companies, but
Entities.
unrelated
Yeah.
entities that can take title that, give them the effective ownership, which will qualify them for the tax credits.
For now, yeah.
Okay.
I do have one question. We just discussed what DSRSD would be on the hook for. I'm thinking of the LAFMA situation where the pipe that was supposed to be 50 years lasted 10. And when we went to sue the contractor, he was out of business and bankrupt. So what protects us if the contractor doesn't exist in 20 years?
Their PPAs are interesting because we have the experience in the industry of many of the providers going bankrupt over the last several years. And that agreement that covers the system installed on your property is in a bankruptcy proceeding an asset. And in all cases I'm aware of, those assets were sold off to other companies because it represents a payment stream, a future payment stream from the district related to an asset that's already been built and put in the ground. So where that gets you in much more trouble is if the entity goes bankrupt prior to or during construction. that can hang you out for years. But we have several clients whose PPA provider has disappeared, and the asset has been sold to another one, and they continue to service the system because they want the payments from it. I would say that if that were to take place in the last couple of years of the PPA, they may not see the value in carrying on, depending on what condition the asset's in. So they're all making those business choices too. But we have a number of systems that are up and running even after bankruptcy.
Thank you.
And solar is very volatile. If we actually pull this off, we get into this agreement, we need to count on a couple of things happening. The agreement will get sold, probably more than once, right? I mean, these companies are always trading portfolios and assets and such. In the bankruptcy, that's a good point, because that happens all the time. We said Cypress Creek go out of business, I think. So from an O&M perspective in the PPA, God, that's just too many acronyms in one sentence. I apologize for that. Will there be guarantees built in that, if they want to assign it to somebody else, if they want to sell our deal, do we get to, can we check under the hood and see who you're trying to sell it to? So it's not Joe Bob's solar service. It's something that's reputable that we know that can actually pull us off.
It's a provision that we have language for, and I assume there'll be some negotiation over. So they always do a flip right after construction, and they have stronger language typically in these agreements that give them flexibility to do so. But that assignment clause, with approval not unreasonably withheld, is kind of a standard you're often landing on. But assignment's always an interesting one with these PPAs. But so it's a good thing to emphasize and for us to be talking about.
I was gonna ask a similar question. Under the worst case scenario, say at 10 years down the road, they're out of business. But I guess one of the advantages to us is the fact is that the infrastructure is all in place, and it's not very easy to go in and tear up all these panels and trays and inverters and so that gives us some I would assume gives us some leverage to work with the takeover company who might be waiting in the wings to take over the contract, so to speak.
That's right. And again, they would be assigned the agreement as is. And so the presumption is you would be paying the same rate and getting the same power. The risk, I think, is more if the systems are not producing what they should, and then you have an opportunity cost of some foregone savings, and you should make sure that whoever the successor would be in that situation intends to maintain the solar assets. The other thing that relates to this is that the agreement has early buyout provisions, so the district can purchase the system at various points in this time frame. Or it needs to. Their original agreement did not, but we're adding those points in, and so long as it's after about 7 years, which is to steer clear of IRS regulations, you should get several bites at that apple in terms of purchasing the asset if you want, which is another reason to make sure that the owner of the asset is taking care of it so that it has some value if and when you want to pull that trigger.
Okay. With that, let me just check if there's any public comment. Do we have any? Thank you very much. This was not an action item. This was just for information. So moving on to item 9, reports 9A, board items 9A1, Joint Power Authority and committee reports. I believe there was just one. The LAVMA board meeting on November 19th. We talked about one of the items was the meeting was continued to date certain, December 9th. Director Halkett and myself went to it. And so, Director Halkett, did you want to?
No, I think you got it covered. I mean, the only wrinkle with the LAVMA, and I'm glad our friend's still here, is there's some issues with, I guess DSRSD owns the property. LAVMA has some kind of easement. The easement only has 3 more years on it. This is a 20-year agreement, so there's a bunch of rigmarole that the lawyers are having fun with that. We talked about the PPA the most. Any other topics?
That was the one where about the assignment of rights.
Right.
The other one was there was this contracting item, which was part of a budget adjustment.
Oh, yeah.
And we identified some potential issues. So staff's going to come back with that. So
Related to some San Leandro sampling station thing
yes, and it
that
was
nobody seems to like.
and a contract went through a couple of different amendments and etc. So we won't belabor the point, but if you're interested in knowing more details, I'm happy to share with it offline. Any questions? If not, moving on to item 9A2, submittal of written reports for days of service for events attended by directors. Do I got any?
I have one.
Okay.
I attended, of course, virtually the CASA board meeting. This meeting was interesting for the first time I can remember. There were no action items. There was only information being proposed. We are going back to Lafayette Park Hotel for the strategic planning meeting next year. They are giving us a good price, and so the vote was to continue, or the direction was to continue. The audit should be complete at our board meeting in December. We should receive the final notice on it. They've been collecting dues and membership. Last year was our biggest growth. We took in 20 new members. A lot of them were vendors, but what the heck, they pay too. The winter conference, as some of you know, has been moved. We are not going to the Hilton. We're going to the Renaissance Esmeralda. So bring your roller skates because it's a huge hotel. And then the 5-year strategic plan that we did in September is going to be presented with action items at our December meeting. And that was all.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other? All right. Moving on to item 9A3, request new agenda items be placed on a future board or committee agenda. Seeing none, moving on to 9B, staff report.
An upcoming announcements. We have the Durwa board meeting next Monday at 6 o'clock here in the board room, followed by on Tuesday, the 9th, the continued LAVMA board meeting. And then our last DSRSD board meeting of the year will be on December 16th.
And with that, we'll be going into closed session. So we'll be retreating to the conference room as directed by staff. And on your way out, please make sure to mute your mics. All right, the board meeting is back in session. The closed session has concluded. There was no reportable actions taken in closed session. Moving on to item 12, adjournment. The meeting is adjourned at 6:54 p.m. Have a good evening.